process of deciding that enforcement was the only way to resolve the principal problem, which is the criminality surrounding the illegal game. I intend to try to resolve whether or not we could have had a different option to solve the problem that I know that we all members of this select committee would want to resolve, which is that of any serious crime at all in the country. So in order to examine that, we have to examine the police commissioner, but also the thinking of where the direction came from to suggest it to us as a government to go down that route. And I think the only place we can do that is through the genesis, which came from His Excellency's office, through his representative of the police commissioner and potentially with the deputy governor. I don't know if that assists or if the DG can assist in that respect.
Mr. Chairman,
I
heard what the Minister of Tourism has said. The fact is, though, it is the broader policy that we are concerned with. We have to vote the fines or don't vote the fines, and that's what we would need the Commissioner of Police to explain to us. Obviously, the government already knows all this because the government has taken this bill, made a bill, brought it to caucus, brought it to cabinet, sent it to the House. So therefore, we already understand. I mean, I would have thought that if what the Honorable Minister has said, that the governor would have explained that in cabinet. That's what I think. And all I want to do, is to get going to start the work because I got a number of amendments. And I missed the introduction because I was not well. I missed the introduction of the bill. And therefore, I didn't get to speak on it. And therefore, I couldn't get to even have a chance to do anything when it was suggested to go to this select committee. And therefore, no amendments could have been drawn at that time. I want to get started, really, and I think that's what we should do, and I hold fast to that.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Two things. One is, I think I should just clarify that the monetary penalty in the bill, the dollar amount, would not be things that were proposed by the Commissioner. That's a government bill. So it wouldn't be, in my view, correct to ask the Commissioner why the fine is set at $2,500 or $10,000 or whatever it is. That's just my take on it. But in terms of what informed the increase in penalty, then clearly that is something that the Commissioner might be able to assist this committee with and so on. So just to clarify that. And secondly, if there is a dispute as to how we should proceed in terms of what, then the best thing for me to do is probably ask this committee to resolve by motion what members would prefer. That is, whether we begin to deal with other things or we wait to hear the Commissioner's evidence to help to inform the discussion, as some members are proposing. So I'm in the hands of members. If there are two suggestions or two schools of thoughts, if I might say so. One is that we should commence doing other things pending arrival of the Commissioner. The other school of thought is that we should wait to hear from the Commissioner and use the Commissioner's evidence to help to inform the discussions going forward.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
Can I just take Mr. Bradley? His mic was on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I accept the Member Bush viewpoint that the information that I suggested to be highlighted by way of the Deputy Governor, if suited, was presented to the Cabinet and the caucus. But the information upon which I think is available should also be available to the public so we can understand what we're trying to accomplish here. Hence the reason, though, that they may see that, yes, the government is aware of it, But my priority here is the people of this country, so they can understand how we got to this point, and also formulate whether it's priority to make any kind of amendments and what amendments, if any. So hence the reason why I'm suggesting that in the interim, until the police commissioner does get here, which I think we're all in agreement with, maybe the foundation of where this came from could be facilitated by the deputy governor, which gives the context for everybody in this room, including the opposition, as to what was the genesis for this move. Again, I highlighted the fact that it was not the government's mandate. Nobody campaigned on it. Obviously, everybody campaigns on keeping Cayman Islands safe, but it wasn't a mandate, so it had to come from somewhere. Where did it come from? Of course, the police commissioner can assist us with that. But as being the representative for His Excellency in this House, the Honorable Deputy Governor could possibly assist why it was presented to the government in the first place.
Chairman, since I was referred to...
Member for Red Bay.
Oh, it's okay.
Mr. Chairman, with your permission, sir, I was contemplating what you said by way of explaining or attempting to explain what the commissioner would provide evidence of. But having looked through the bill, the only changes of consequence in this are the increases in penalties. There is nothing else. There is no policy changes. So I'm not sure what the commissioner is going to tell us, although I'm anxious to ask him, that we don't already know. Mr. Chairman, this is a bit awkward because you were then, as you are now, the Attorney General, when I was Premier, and the two members sitting directly in front of me were two of my ministers, when almost the exact same proposals were brought to us in Cabinet and brought down here. And we took a policy decision that we would not proceed with them because we felt that the only real consequence was going to be the persecution of our people, particularly our older people, who like to buy a number. And no other real policy or consequence was going to flow from it. It is not just number sellers that get robbed.
Thank you.
Gas stations, stores, pizza parlors, Subway, you name it. Of the 53 robberies that I managed to track over the past few months, only 3 of them, those were reported anyhow, related to the people who were selling numbers. So I think we need to have some discussion about the policy that underlies these changes, because if we accept the policy, then perhaps you can persuade some of us on this side to support the changes in or increases in penalty, but not to simply increase the penalties when we know the people that are going to get arrested right away are our own people, mostly older Caymanians, who go and buy a number.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
And Mr. Chairman, I could give evidence about this because I know from my interaction with people, particularly in central Georgetown, what is the principal demographic that buys numbers?
Thank you, Honourable Member from Red Bay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
you see, we are already discussing pros and cons, right? And that's why I wanted to take it from the very beginning of this bill, and where I propose to start with amendments. But I want to say also, Mr. Chairman, that in regards to what the Minister of Tourism has said, I can't completely buy that, because the fact is the bill brought to caucus The bill went through cabinet. It came down here, and we had a second reading from the Honorable Premier, and I know he explained this. Pick up the Hansard and you will see. There was a second reading, wasn't it? Second reading debate, that is. Yeah. And so all of that would have been explained. So I understand the member wanting the public to know that where it originated, and he has said that, so we now know. I didn't know that before, but I now know. But the Honorable Premier introduced the bill, as far as I know, in a second reading, and explained the bill and therefore government policy, because the bill is government policy. So all I want to do is to begin work on the bill before us, and that's what we should be doing, because that's what the Select Committee did. Now, yeah, we have agreed to call witnesses, and I don't mind the Commissioner coming and telling us what he knows. I'm glad that we came to that conclusion. I want, as far as I'm concerned, maybe fines will be increased, need to be increased, but how much? And how much for who? The seller, the buyer, or the banker?
Thank you, Honorable Member. All of this is part of the discussion, so it is all in the round. I think, was it the Minister of Planning who wanted to? Someone indicated just now.
Mr.
Honorable Member, Honorable Minister.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. I was trying to solicit opportunity for understanding so I can do the appropriate line of questioning to ultimately come to where I think most people are going to come to in respect to this procedure of examination of the bill that's proposed, because we're making amendments, and the only thing that we can do as proposed by Mr. Bush is to go and decide, say, whether the penalty is going to be 300 or 100 or 3,000 or 1,000, and we're not going to get very far, because I think what we need to examine is whether this bill should have been brought in the first place. And the basis of the questions I want to ask is the ideology of why we have chosen to resolve a problem with further deterrence when that is not the only way to resolve criminality. So it is obvious in the public domain that some people are of the view that the culture within our country is that not everybody sees buying a number as to be as sinful or as criminal as it once was. So my line of questioning to the genesis of where this came from is, was there a proper professional assessment done in respect to the way to resolve the ultimate problem that we want to resolve, which is serious crime around this activity? Now, we all have heard in this honorable house that the government intends to have a referendum, and a referendum on a national lottery, which could potentially be defined as numbers as itself, which would potentially resolve this matter of the penalties. So the question is whether we should have actually brought this bill at all until we have heard from the people. Because if my line of questioning to the Genesis originators is that if you have a national referendum and people are allowed to do it legally, wouldn't the criminality around the issue go away? And I am saying that I do not think that that assessment was done, because the only advice that the government got, because I am a part of the government, was from the police commissioner, whose principal training has been from an enforcement arm. He's not a specialist in anything else. And studies will show that there is other ways to resolve an illegal activity. We have had historical records of that, particularly when it came to the illegality of alcohol sales many, many moons ago before my birth. And as much as they tried to penalize it, it never went away. The demand and the want and the trade in that area never changed. But when they decided to legalize it, almost 80% of the criminality surrounding that activity was reduced. Now, of course, there's still liquor stores that get robbed, but the criminality around it decreased tremendously. So I want to examine whether or not this bill should actually go forward at all before we even talk about what the level of penalties should be.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Honourable Member. On the question of whether the Deputy Governor can assist, I don't think the committee has the power as a select committee to summon a member of government as opposed to a member of this House, rather, as opposed to a civil servant. It's entirely within the Honourable Deputy Governor's gift. If he, as part of his contribution to the committee, he wants to make a contribution as to what he thinks, help to inform the whole thing. So
Mr. Chairman.
Entirely up to him. Honourable Member.
Mr. Chairman, this is going to be my last time until I get to move my amendments. But I disagree that, and while I support the government's position and voted to move for a referendum, the two things are completely different. A lottery and the numbers games are completely different. And you can put it and speed it any way you want. The experience has been throughout the Caribbean that they had a numbers problem and they introduced a lottery, but the numbers game continued. And that's exactly what will happen, because the two things are completely different. Completely different. And if you think not, then go research some of the other countries that had a numbers game and introduce lotteries and find out if I'm wrong in saying that the numbers game continue alongside the lottery. And all I'm saying is, my position is make it legal. Yes, make the numbers game legal, and government find ways and means to do that, and that will solve the problem of the criminality.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, member from West Bay. Sorry, Minister from Minister of Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to go on the back end of the member, Mr. Bush's comments just now, and suggest that I think we agree but disagree a little bit. The reason I say that is that though it may be perceived that numbers in a national lottery is fundamentally different, but the principles behind it are the same. It's just the variable of probability of winning is different. So, for example, for the listening audience, a national lottery has a higher, or very, very low risk, low level of probability of you winning, because you're getting one odds out of 100 million people, for example, in the Florida National Lottery. Now, in a numbers game, and I'm going to use examples as to where we've been informed by the Royal Cayman Police Service, you have the numbers that I think is originated from Honduras, which goes between 1 and 100. So you have a higher probability of success of winning the rate of whatever, if you select that number, say 30, and whatever ratio you get for the amount that you buy. So there's a higher probability you're going to guess the number between 1 and 100. But 00 to 99 is what I'm being informed. I didn't know it because I don't buy numbers. And I understand that the Jamaica numbers is from 1 to 36, I think. 1 to 36? 1 to 36. So your probabilities of winning is higher. But the foundation of the idea of a game of chance, and I didn't mean to take that from the wording of the law, but your probabilities of win is exactly the same, it's just in a different ratio. So if we were to say the people said that they were okay for a national lottery, one can easily assume, because they are the same principles with a different ratio, that you would also be in support of what is being considered as numbers, but I see them as to be the same. So to the member's point, Mr. Bush's point, is that I agree with him that if you do a national lottery, you're also agreeing to what is being perceived as numbers, because they're both one and the same. But what I was trying to do before in my line of questioning is, why are we talking about this first before we're talking to our people? And I need to get to the bottom of that first, so that people can understand why the bill is here at all. And maybe if the DG could highlight whether he would be willing to offer some assistance in this area. Of course, this committee cannot mandate that he does so, because he's a member, but we need to, the member has indicated he's willing to assist, and I think it would help this discussion and the listening audience as to how we got here.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable
Mr. Chair.
Minister from Cayman, right? Okay.
Mr. Chair, we've had some interesting discussion, but what this boils down to is that the actions of both the previous government and this government in bringing this very similar amendment bills. So let me put it this way. This government is not persecuting anybody any more than the previous leader would have been in promoting an amendment bill through caucus and his cabinet at that time. The foundation of all of it is the evidence which the commissioner will be able to provide to us, the perspective which he will be able to provide. He is the expert on not just changing laws to increase enforcement measures, but understanding how to manage and control crime overall. He has had lots of experience with this. I don't think there's any denying that. And Mr. Chair, the Commissioner is here, present, and available to us now. So I think we can stop sort of going in circles and give him the opportunity to provide his evidence, and for the committee to ask him questions. And then we can, I think, constructively go forward from there.
Thank you, Premier.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Member from...
Might I just invite members' kind attention to Standing Order 726 in order to make sure that the tautological circling perhaps is reduced at its best. The deliberation of a select committee shall be confined to the matters referred to it by the House, and to any extension or limitation thereof made by the House, and in the case of a select committee, to the bill. And the relevant part for us this morning would be the deliberations of a select committee would be confined to the bill committed to it, which is the bill before us, and the relevant amendments. At this stage, in a select committee is not really about the merits or the demerits or the modus operandi. It's basically the bill that's before us, and if any amendments, as all members would know, is proposed, those amendments have to be proposed before the debate is done. Otherwise, we'd be anticipating the debate. So just to keep it in sequence so that we can hopefully have a proper procedural select committee, which will set precedents in future. I have no doubt about it.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, forgive me, I do think I have to take part in that comment, because I am concerned about the outcome of what that can be perceived as what was said. As to the standing orders, that highlights trying to keep the bill in context as to the amendments. Though I accept that we have to be within scope of the discussion, but as you have highlighted just yesterday per Erskine May, this select committee can make a decision to either, one, make amendments to it, or to even determine a report as to whether the bill should be shot down or not. And with Erskine May being, I would dare say, more senior in standing orders to ours, even though ours is supposed to be principal, it only should be acted on when it's silent within our standing orders. My point is that the relevance of how it started and its examination as to bring these amendments is important to the context of the discussion of whether we move forward with amendments, increase them, decrease them, or even accept it at all. So I am saying, though the scope is correct with the honorable member just said about the amendments, the genesis of the bill is also an important context to the discussion.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. We have the Commissioner of Police, and of course, busy gentleman, and he has kindly agreed to be here at short notice. So if we could do the right thing of taking his testimony, and then we'll have all the time to discuss all the other issues in the round as a committee. And so if it is okay with members, I'll invite the Commissioner of Police to come in. And also, if it is, yeah, thanks, I'll do so. Commissioner, if you could use one of these chair. Then. Commissioner Byrne, Commissioner Byrne, thanks for coming. And thanks for, at very short notice, volunteering to come and assist this committee in terms of the deliberations on the Gambling Amendment Bill 2022, Amendment Bill 2022. Before we begin, I'm going to ask you to state your full name and your office.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning. Derek Byrne, Commissioner of Police for the Royal Cayman Islands Police Service.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner, we normally, well, I'm told as a matter of convention that you normally don't swear witness unless there is some kind of reason to want to do so, but I'm in the hands of members. I don't propose to swear the Commissioner of Police, but as are members content with him giving this evidence without being sworn? Thank you very much, very kind indication. Thanks. So, Commissioner, just to set the stage, the matter before the Select Committee is a review. Is a review of the Gambling Amendment Bill 2022. To determine the time frame for the Gambling Amendment Bill 2022 to be brought back to the House, make recommendations, amendments, etc., if any, to the Gambling Amendment Bill 2022, produce a report and the recommendations of the Gambling Amendment Bill 2022 by the provisional date of Monday, 20th February 2023, present the report of the Select Committee to the House pursuant to Order 74, of the Parliament Standing Orders 2022 consolidation. And what we have is a bill with a proposed range of increased penalties to the Gambling Act. And members are interested in understanding, if you will, the concerns that would have helped to inform the need to amend the penalties to act as a deterrent, if you will, for persons who are involved in illegal gambling, and what are the concerns in particular from a law enforcement standpoint that would help to inform the object of the bill and the legislation generally. So if you could, with that sort of a broad parameters in mind, assist the committee as you understand what the objectives are. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, perhaps if I could beg your indulgence and ask the Commissioner of Police whether, in his opinion, there is anything in your presentation that would be considered a risk to national security that you would require in camera?
Thank you, Minister, and I will be very careful and circumspect in what I say, and I hope they will be general and informative comments to assist the House.
Thank you, Chair. So thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Honourable Member. So you proceed with those within those permissible limits.
So good morning and thank you for the opportunity. I'm clear just to make a general opening statement if I can. So, Chairman, this is something I've been looking at for the past 6 years in my role as Commissioner of Police for the Royal Cayman Islands Police Service, and I suppose as a senior law enforcement officer for the Cayman Islands, and something that has caused me considerable concern. So tried to contextualise that then for members of the House, and I see illegal gambling in all of its forms as a hugely pervasive criminal activity in the Cayman Islands, and it impacts right across strata in the Cayman Islands. It has capacity to cause significant damage. I appreciate this, these are general statements at the moment, and I may have to zero in on them. I believe that the illegal gambling is an organised criminal activity by criminal enterprise. It has international links. It is very apparent in our communities, and it involves a significant amount of money laundering. I would conservatively estimate that the illicit proceeds of illegal gambling on the Cayman Islands are somewhere between 30 million and 50 million Cayman dollars per annum in all of its activities. And there is a tiered hierarchical structure in terms of the organised crime links. In other words, we have people that are organising these events, we have sellers, we have people that collect the crimes that are associated with this illegal gambling. They span into drugs, firearms, extortion, assaults, and one of the more serious incidents in 2022 culminated in a murder of a person well known and documented, a person before the courts charged with the murder at the moment. So it is a hugely pervasive criminal activity in the Cayman Islands, and a general comment from me that the current laws provide little or no deterrent, and the obviously attempts by government to bring forward new legislation provide stronger deterrence to deal with all of the associated criminal activity associated with illegal gambling in the Cayman Islands. My concern is that we do nothing and we allow people to break the rule of law in the Cayman Islands. I'm looking at how this money then moves throughout the community, and we see it in little corner shops, happening in barber shops. We see it associated with illegal immigration, people arriving on island looking for work permits. It's often said to me they come as gardeners, but in fact what they're here to do is sell numbers, make money. This causes lots of problems inside in the community. And as I said, it permeates then in crime for drugs, firearms, extortion, assaults. And it's occurring on a daily basis, and it's occurring in plain sight in the Cayman Islands, in our communities, and I do have great concerns about its impact. The money laundering aspect of it, we see the money being laundered. Money mules take money from the country, going through our airports. We have had some evidence of that. We see vehicles being bought, and we see assets being accumulated in terms of property being bought and investment in small businesses. That's how it actually works in the economy inside here, and it's not to lose sight of us as a global financial centre, and then this type of money laundering going on in the background. And as I said, a very conservative figure, readjusted from 2016 figures downwards to a very conservative figure of between 30 and 50 million Cayman dollars per annum in this type of criminal activity in the Cayman Islands. That is a general overview or introduction, Chairman, just in terms of what I'm seeing, of what I'm hearing, of the intelligence I've had an opportunity to view over the past 6 years, and from officers I've spoken to that are involved in the investigation of crimes associated with illegal gambling.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Very helpful round up our overview. Members, understandably, will have some questions.
Please.
So you can.
Good morning, Commissioner.
Good morning. Good morning, sir.
It's an honor to have you in the House to discuss this topic. I'm glad that you're here to provide context, because the listening audience, our people, want to understand why and what we're doing here. And I think your answers will give much clarity. I'm going to ask you a number of questions, not to try to make it be a trap or anything like that, but just so we can get into the psyche of what has been transpiring over time, right? So thank you again. You suggested that the numbers game is across a number of, sorry, through you, Mr. Chairman. The witness has suggested this being across a number of stratas. When you mean across a number of stratas, what do you mean? Explain to us, the members, but also the listening public, what you mean across different categories and people in society. Elaborate on that for me, please.
So my concern, I have written this and I would have spoken at different forums, security forums, that public officials, civil servants, unemployed persons, right across social strata. We know that there are small shops in central Georgetown, for example, that would have been discussed, that people are inside there and are conducting this business, this illegal business, this illegal numbers. And it's going on a daily basis, 7 days per week, that it's going on. So when I say social strata, it's not confined to one section of the population. It's right across the social spectrum. That's my assessment.
Thank you, Commissioner. Through you, Mr. Chairman, and I know you never intentionally did this, but just for the listening audience, I know when you say Central Georgetown, because my constituency is associated with Central Georgetown as a constituency, I know you mean the center heart of Georgetown together, which falls in other constituencies like Georgetown North, Georgetown East,
I do,
and so forth, right?
Yeah, and apologies. I mean, if I was to focus in or zero in, I would say Eastern Avenue is a problem, is a particular problem for us. We know it's a center of congregation. And we know that, and a lot of crimes would have occurred there. So not to single out a constituency that's of concern to you, I'm just generally,
Totally understand. Thank you so much. Can I just ask, obviously your profession is in prevention of crime and the different strategies, and your advice to the governor as your senior head to resolve this problem, you made the suggestion that based on what you just said, there's little or no deterrence within the law, meaning basically low penalties. Would that be correct?
That's one aspect. I mean, I would have had several conversations with His Excellency the Governor, and I would have been explaining that permeating right throughout our crime. So I look at the Cayman Islands as a wonderful place, relatively crime-free, and I ask myself, what are the problems? So as I go to His Excellency the Governor and indeed the National Security Council, this issue keeps returning. There's something about illegal gambling that's permeating right across society and crime. It's the drugs, it's the firearms, it's the extortion, it's the assaults, it's the robberies. And then last year we had this horrific murder of Mr. Elliott. I think there's no issue mentioning his name. It's known, it's a public record. And we have a person charged before the courts. And this all, as we go back and examine our intelligence, speaks to illegal gambling and all of the associated issues with it. And a small number of people making, large amounts of money and then using it to invest in business. It's wide and permeating, and I would have briefed His Excellency the Governor on this and said, this is a real problem. Of all the problems you have in the Cayman Islands, illegal gambling is a significant problem, and strongly urging that something is done, and done as speedily as possible to address it. I'm also concerned about our reputation internationally, in terms of that we would be seen as weak in our enforcement or with any kind of a tolerance towards money laundering, considering that we are one of the largest, global financial centres. So in a really wide context, I would have had wide-reaching conversations with His Excellency the Governor, and I would have also had the opportunity to mention this on more than one occasion at the National Security Council.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Through you, Mr. Chair, again. I do agree with you that this has wide-reaching penalties for Cayman, reputational damage, and so forth, and we got to definitely take the bull by the horns. But can I just ask you, how many arrests? Because it is currently still illegal, even though the penalties are very small. There's this attitude within our society that the police don't go after persons who are involved because it is being seen as, why do I put so much energy? And matter of fact, I think you gave evidence to the government previously, suggesting that it's not worth the value for money to go after a person who's involved in the crime because the penalties are so small, the manpower, court time, legal time, that you get charged $100 maybe, I think was the amount. So is that the perspective? So
the perspective, I think I need to be really, really clear on this. It's not that we shouldn't go after it. It's that it seems to be that there's a kind of a very high tolerance level towards illegal gambling in the Cayman Islands, which I believe is wrong. I believe it's the wrong premise, that we believe that the laws are inadequate. They don't provide any real deterrent. So the police should be doing more. I accept the police should be doing more. And a first step in the process then is to make the laws commensurate with the level of crime and the money that's being generated, the proceeds. Allow us to do more, and I may have to put more resources into it. But I mean, more than what you're seeing with numbers, we've had cockfighting, we've had other types of betting taking place on the island. So it has wide application across the island in the context of what crime means in the Cayman Islands. Illegal gambling is very much, it permeates right throughout the system. There's an ecosystem, and it's an illegal ecosystem.
Through you, Mr. Chair, are you suggesting that there is an acceptance within the police force for illegal numbers?
Certainly no acceptance from me. I think that we could be doing more. I don't think we call it an acceptance. I think that there's probably people mightn't see the value in it because it's not, there's no real deterrent. It goes back to that point we made earlier on. As it stands, it seems that going to court is, yes, it's a breach of the criminal law. It needs to be prosecuted. It can't be ignored. We could ignore several laws, but this is one that we're talking about that has really wide strategic implications.
So through you, Mr. Chair, who's ignoring it? Because I'm asking you whether or not the police department, because it's still a crime. The penalty is low. Granted, I accept that.
Yeah.
But the police can still arrest somebody even if it's for $10. I'm asking you then, if you're saying there's an acceptance, who are you speaking of by way of acceptance?
No, well, I really want to be very careful about saying an acceptance. I think society tolerates it, or appears to tolerate it in the Cayman Islands. I'm saying it shouldn't, and I'm saying the police should be doing more. I have said that previously. I've not said that we're doing enough. I'm saying we could do more and we should do more. But it's this push-pull factor that because of the tolerance level, the inputs don't seem to be, we could be doing more.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. So the tolerance level of the people involved has nothing to do with the police ability to arrest. So you still have the ability to arrest, to penalize somebody, put them in court, even though it may seem not cost effective because the fine is so small, but you could still be doing that right now. Would that be a correct statement?
No, it is correct that we have limited powers, very limited powers in terms of what we can do. They are outdated. I think if you went back and you saw, I think it's 1964 legislation that we're actually dealing with when we first start dealing with illegal gambling. We're now moved on many, many years, and we haven't actually moved our legislation in line with what's happening and with the risks that I have mentioned in terms of money laundering, criminal enterprise, organized crime, drugs, firearms, assaults. It hasn't, I don't think it's recognized that all of these associated crimes are connected with illegal gambling. It's seen as a small, isolated, something that's happening in an ecosystem in the Cayman Islands.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, when you said you had limited powers and the laws need to be changed, that's a strong point, Mr. Commissioner. But this bill that is being presented has nothing to do with the powers. It has to do with the amount of the deterrent. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think they're interconnected. I don't think that they may not be synonymous, but I mean, they're interconnected. If there's more powers and more of a deterrent, well, then there should be greater enforcement.
Okay, so would you, through you again, Mr. Chair, so would you agree then this bill doesn't change your ability to do anything different other than the penalties? So you could technically right now still, if we pass this bill today, you'd still be in the same position as to arrest. The only outcome would be whether they be penalized more in a penalty in court. Would that be correct?
The penalty, the punishment would meet the crime, would be commensurate, be proportionate, should be what, up-to-date crimes and up-to-date penalties for what we understand of illegal gambling now as to what was understood many, many years ago. There's an evolution taking place, or has taken place, in terms of what's happening in society, and my sense, respectful submission, is the onus is on the relevant authorities to respond and provide a proportionate or an appropriate response to what's happening in society.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, can you say how many arrests have you had over the last year in respect to numbers?
They are very few. I mean, I can come back with numbers. I hadn't put together, in fact, statistics in terms of numbers of arrests. They are very, very few. But what I've highlighted is the number of crimes that we're looking at in terms of the assaults and the robberies and the intelligence picture. So I'm giving you a much broader outlook in terms of, rather than just arrests, I'm trying to explain to you what is actually happening in society and what's happening in plain sight in the community.
I agree that it's definitely a society issue, but that's not what we're focusing on right now. Yeah. We're talking about the ability to do more as your force. So you're saying you accepted that very little amount of arrest. This just increases the penalties. Is the arrest going to increase tremendously after this bill is passed by penalty?
Well, I certainly, the focus of my discussions in National Security Council and with His Excellency was I would certainly do an awful lot more if I thought the appropriate response was there, or a proportionate response to deal with it was. And the concern is that, and I think I've said it a few moments earlier, that we're not doing enough to address all of these concerns, or we wouldn't have a murder, we wouldn't have the level of extortion, we wouldn't have the level of robberies that we have. And then I'm also afraid that we're losing a young section of the population with all these associated crimes. What I'm trying to do is make sure that we clearly understand the link between the proceeds of illegal gambling and what's happening in communities with young people getting involved in crime and maybe ignoring the law or feeling that this is nothing that they should be worried about, that there's an acceptable or a tolerance for illegal gambling and all that goes with it. Buy drugs, buy guns, commit robberies, get involved in extortion.
I agree with you, Commissioner. We definitely shouldn't allow that. But it is factual, through you, Mr. Chair, that you are responsible for the area of ensuring that people don't see that this is okay. It has nothing to do with the penalties. Because you have said and gave evidence here today that it's prevalent in our society, where you can practically drive out and see it. You see it in the barbershops. You have intel. You know that it's happening, but you also gave evidence that very little is being done. I think that the association of the increase in penalties has really nothing to do with whether your office is actually penalizing the people regardless of the fine. Because you can still take them to court for $10 or 10 grand. It doesn't change much. Would you agree with that assessment, or am I wrong?
Well, no, I come back and I say that, crimes are committed and not reported to the police, again, because of this tolerance level. It's not all the crimes are reported to the police, we know that. So there's stuff happening, again, because of this acceptance of an ecosystem that is occurring in Cayman society. And I know you say that, yes, I as the police commissioner and the police service are responsible, but I also think the whole of society in the Cayman Islands has a responsibility to say that we don't want to tolerate illegal gambling and we don't want to be associated with the money laundering or the crimes that I've mentioned that are occurring, which are consequent, I believe, and associated to the gambit of illegal gambling.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, I think it's a good opportunity or prime time to say that, the government and myself and everybody sympathizes with the victims of these severe crimes, and we do want to resolve this problem. Commissioner, you were talking about the people's attitude to acceptance. Would it be fair to say that you see, based on your reports and your expert opinion, that there's a large percentage of people in this country think that it's okay or should be legal? Is that a fair comment?
It certainly puzzles me and does concern me that people don't fully understand or grasp what's associated with legal gambling. If you take it in isolation, it just seems to be legal gambling. But what I've been trying to do is explain here all of the associated criminal activity and the criminal enterprise and the criminal organization that's involved in illegal gambling. And if I could educate society, or society clearly understood, I think there'd be less of a tolerance for it. If they just realize how it kind of kicks in right across society and impacts families and, you know, young people, how they're going to develop, and the myriad of crime that I've spoken about right across. Those are my big concerns, and those are the conversations I have when I'm discussing illegal gambling. So when I go into my office during the day, I deal with a range of issues, and somewhere in the middle of it, there's always this illegal gambling, or there's something associated with illegal gambling, and I'm not sure that society has a full grasp or an understanding of its impact and its future impact, its current and future impact on society and our international standing.
I agree with you, Commissioner, and I want to go down that line with you, right? And through you, Mr. Chair, the concept of the concern of our global image, our brand, and particularly our financial services component, do you think that if it was legal, that we would resolve a lot of the concerns of potential money laundering? If we had a national lottery and we legalized numbers, would that resolve that very serious component of this? Because we wouldn't want to damage our economy. Would that resolve that in your opinion?
So legal gambling then is like part of social policy. And then my sense from social policy perspective is you regulate and control. And then there's a defined set of rules in which this will operate. There is no defined set of rules now. It's breach of rule of law. And we sit here and we say, if we tolerate illegal gambling, we discard the rule of law and we allow all these things happen. And if we move to the proposition, this is just my sense, input in terms of social policy, then we regulate it and control, and we have a set of guidelines and rules, and government or the regulator has control of what's actually happening. And that provides a set of rules in which we can all operate and we all understand. And I'm sure would have immense benefits for society once the rules are established.
Thank you so much. Through you, Mr. Chair. So is it plausible then that if it was to become legal, that the criminality surrounding that we're experiencing now, that we all want to get rid of, would diminish and decrease tremendously? Because you've heard me respond to you in your presentation to government before about what would be awarded to persons who now take what we call numbers in national lottery to a legal extent. So they would then be awarded the opportunity for one, first thing first, if they were to ever be robbed, be a witness in court. Because that's one of the biggest problems, is they never want to tell you because they know they're involved in something illegal. So right away, if they're legal, they're going to say, call the police up and say, listen, this happened, here's what I saw, and so forth. So that would happen. They would also be allowed to have security guards or say, for instance, a brink truck to pick up their cash like a normal shop would. They would be able to deposit their monies in a bank rather than having it at home, you know, where you have people getting robbed on their way home. All of those things would be resolved. So would it be fair to come to the conclusion that if it was legal, a lot of the criminality surrounding it would be reduced?
Well, my sense is, I'm not sure what exactly you're asking me. I don't think that introducing a national lottery and allowing illegal activity to take place are synonymous. I believe they're two separate issues. So the criminal act is whether we comply with the rule of law or we don't. And if we don't, what are the consequences? The other proposition then is that we introduce a regulated, we call it industry or business, with a set of rules controlled by government. And that falls into any business acumen.
I think we're saying...
But I don't think they're synonymous, and I don't think that there's a level of interdependence. The legalizing it would obviously provide that control aspect to it. But my concern as a police officer is I can't ignore the rule of law.
I agree with you. I think we're saying the same thing, Commissioner. And through you again, Mr. Chair, what I probably failed to say so we can understand is that would it be logical that those who are in the illegal behavior, once becomes illegal, will then regularize themselves to be in those regulated framework? So there would be less people outside of the regulated framework in a dark zone. So if a person who's selling numbers now illegally would say, well, I can now go to government and get a permit to do this and make money off of it and pay a fee to government, wouldn't they do that?
Well, I certainly, there's no indication on my part that a person involved in a criminal enterprise now would switch to being involved in a regulated lottery. I don't know the answer to that. They may or may not.
All right.
But I mean, that's a business proposition. And I don't think that I could actually answer that. But
Fair.
It would be a surprise to me that the persons are doing what they can to avoid the legitimate economy. This is all illicit.
Okay.
This money. And the money, as I said, is leaving the country through money mules and being invested illegally then in assets, whether it's vehicles or homes or small businesses.
Well, maybe that was an unfair question, but I'll just state for the record that I believe that's what would happen. But let me ask you a very, very important question, which is, outside of your expertise as an enforcement specialist, which that's what you're trained to do, that's how you resolve problems, is you tactically create legislation, advise legislation, and tactics within your police arms units and traffic and so forth to control a regulated area. Was there any other investigation of different strategies to resolve this problem outside of enforcement that you are aware of that help advise how government should resolve this problem?
Well, I mean, in a wider context, there was always the education and alternatives, employment and all those things that happened. But from a policing perspective, you look at strategic, operational, and tactical interventions, strategically the law, operationally what is the extent of the problem, and tactically the enforcement. That's the way you will tackle it from a policing perspective. And yes, police officers look at it through the prism of enforcement, as they should. But they're acutely aware of the wider societal implications. And I go back to the people we're talking about, the young people in crime, the people that are intimidated, the people that find themselves in a poverty trap, some people hoping to make a small amount of money by investing in the illegal lottery, and this vicious circle that occurs in society, people spending their last dollar or couple of dollars trying to make money to keep themselves, to sustain themselves. This is what you hear in communities, and to me, it's really quite serious what's going on, and the rule of law then underpins everything. Either we stick with it or we abandon it.
Thank you so much. Just in wrapping, I'm going to start wrapping up my line of questioning now. So the answer is no. You did not get any other advice as to how to resolve the criminality around it other than the enforcement arm?
Predominantly, yes. I mean, that is how, say, a police service would deal with it. We enforce it. We identify the extent or scale of the problem, which I believe I've done, and with the conservative estimate of the 30 to 50 million, which is revised downwards from some estimates provided years ago, identified the range of criminality that's involved. And then my function then, I believe, as the law enforcement agency or primary law enforcement agency then, is to tackle this and work with wider society, government included, to try and deal with all the issues. And members of society that have very valuable inputs, I'm sure, to provide to assist us in coming to a resolution.
So I don't think it's your role, so it's kind of a hard question, but just to cover the ground, did you involve any analysis with anybody outside of the enforcement arm as to how to resolve this problem? What I'm trying to get at, I'll be straightforward. Was there any examination before a suggestion to increase the penalties that maybe a way to resolve this is not to make it illegal anymore? Because I know that I believe that you are aware that there is some people who think that it should be legal and therefore, would resolve a lot of the problems. So were there any other discussions with any other agencies or professional theorists outside of the enforcement arm to assist with?
I'm not really understanding that anyone believes that gambling should be made illegal. Illegal gambling should be made illegal or decriminalised. That bit I don't understand. I'm aware of the alternative in terms of one aspect being a lottery, but I've not heard the argument that we should decriminalise, if that's the intention, illegal gambling. And I'm not sure how I could reconcile that as a law enforcement officer when I'm talking to you about gangs, intimidation, robberies, extortion. I don't know how I could reconcile that.
All right. Are you aware that the government is currently considering the decriminalization of marijuana at the moment?
I've heard the wider debate, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you know if there's been any other consultation with the people of this country whether this should be legal or not before the bill came out?
This is illegal gambling.
Yes.
The
numbers.
I'm not. There has been debate, I understand, back in 2016, 2018, in advance of the gambling bill. Some type of debate, but as it relates to my tenure, I've basically looked at it from the law enforcement perspective.
Commissioner, I want to say thank you so much. You were really helpful for me. I may have a couple other questions, but I know that my colleagues probably have some for you. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Commissioner. Any other members have any questions for the Commissioner?
Mr. Chair.
Sorry, Premier, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I certainly want to add my thanks to the Commissioner as well for being present and for sharing his views with this committee. Mr. Chair, through you, could I ask the Commissioner if he has a sense of whether the issues around illegal gambling and all of the various interconnected problems that he has identified or noted have been getting worse than he has observed in the past?
Thank you, Honourable Premier. So I think that things couldn't have got much worse following the murder last year of Mr. Elliott, and we know that that's associated with illegal gambling. And yeah, my sense would be we have seen increased robberies. You would have known in the last 4 months of December of 2022, we saw it, and some of those crimes were associated with robberies and illegal gambling. And I do think that they do attract criminal activity. The illegal gambling itself, locations are known, the fact that money is there, and that the less likelihood of reporting it to the police is a kind of an incentive. It's a byproduct of an incentive there for persons involved in this. So my sense would be that it hasn't diminished. We are, I would think, Cayman society, and particularly as we strive, and I know government strive very hard to provide this crime-free island, and crime is relatively low on the island. And I do think that underpinning all this, there is a very toxic ecosystem involving this illegal gambling, and it permeates, I've said it, right across the social strata and manifests itself in the commission of crime, and I am concerned about it.
Well, thank you, Mr. Commissioner. And Mr. Chair, with your permission, I would just ask a follow-up question, which is, if these amendments, I mean, clearly the advice you have given government as the police commissioner is that these changes to the Gambling Act, by virtue of the proposed Gambling Amendment Bill 2022, from your perspective, would help to lower the, first of all, to ensure that there is less of an acceptance that some of these provisions would form more of a deterrent value, and that this would contribute to lowering the incidence of both the specific operations of illegal gambling, but also the related activities that you have detailed. In your view, if we were to make these amendments now, the benefits that would flow would be to improve the security position for the country, the people, and minimize or help to reduce the incidence of negative consequences for society as a whole.
Thank you, Premier, and I certainly support that proposition. It strengthens the hand of the enforcement agencies, which is primarily the police service. I think it strengthens the capacity of the judiciary to deal with it, and I think it signals to the community the lack of tolerance towards this illegal activity in the Cayman Islands. So as a wider package, it's progressive, and it brings us forward, and it's a commensurate or proportionate response to what we're dealing with in the Cayman Island society at the moment in terms of illegal gambling.
Thank you, Commissioner, and again, with the permission of the Chair. So I understand you to be saying then that it would have a positive benefit in terms of reducing the incidence and improving security for society, possibly even national security improvement as well. So implicit in that might be that if we had done this earlier, for example, we would be that much better off. Perhaps even we might have a situation where we might not have had some of the at least this one loss of life. And I believe there were, I don't know whether you can speak to it, but I think there were some references to other potential, either, well, let me just say homicides, that may have been connected to illegal gambling as well.
Thank you, Premier. Yeah, that is exactly right, exactly as you've said it there. As I said, we strengthen our hand and we signify to community and society the lack of intolerance or the lack of tolerance to illegal gambling to improve our security situation and our international standing and protect our communities, including the vulnerable in the communities. It has been connected with serious crimes, and as I said, the most serious being the murder which occurred of Mr. Elliott in 2022. That's as serious as it gets, and there have been other related crimes where guns have been produced and homicides have been threatened. So people are under threat. There is no doubt about that, and I support exactly what you've said there in terms of strengthening and the benefits of strengthening the legislation.
Thank you, Commissioner, and Mr. Chair, thank you as well. Just one other question for now. Certainly, your experience would have been that as legislators, as parliamentarians and representatives of the people of the country, whenever there is a threat, whenever there is advice given that there are certain impacts on the people that affect their security. Whenever we can see for ourselves that this is the case, the normal approach of representatives would be to reflect concern and perhaps make demands of you to increase your level of policing activity, and probably also to come in terms of representing the interests of the people in this house, and ask for increased penalties and support increased penalties to act as a deterrent. That is what you would have experienced. Do you have a view as to why perhaps this is such a controversial issue at this point, when we have these impacts that are going on that we have experienced?
Yeah, so thank you, Premier. And a general comment again is that policing by its very nature is dynamic, and you're all the time working to close the gap. Things are happening in the environment and you're responding. You're always responding. This is symptomatic of what's happening in our society at the moment. And I know I've been speaking at it at NSC since 2018 in terms of the requirement to move ahead with increased legislation and move forward with greater powers to prevent this type of illegal activity in our communities, in our societies, to protect our vulnerable and to protect the communities. And the large majority of our persons in society here in Cayman Islands, as you all know, are law-abiding people that want to live in peace and harmony here. And then this type of crime just permeates and causes this great difficulty. So something I've been speaking about, and what we're trying to do is move ahead, or my suggestion is to move ahead to close the gap, to increase our security and protect our communities.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Mr. Chair, if I could prevail, just one final question, despite what I said earlier about that being the final one. The question that I would have for the Commissioner is, in the context of some of the earlier questions and the answers provided, if there was legal, regulated, fully regulated, do you think that that would mean necessarily that there would be no, I think it was implicit in what you were saying, but I just wanted to clarify, do you think that that would mean there would be no illegal activities along the same lines as we have today that continue to occur? And certainly that would be, I think, the experience of other jurisdictions where there is legal gambling.
My sense there, Premier, I suppose, trying to look through the looking glass, is that you're providing a legal alternative. So therefore you're reducing the capacity for the illegal activity to take place. People find an alternative that is regulated and controlled. So from the piece of research that I have done in terms of preparing my papers, it has worked successfully elsewhere. I mean, I know there's a lot of work to be done. I appreciate that's outside of my control, but I do think that it does provide a good legal alternative, and that should, in effect, reduce the capacity for the illegal activity associated with illegal gambling, and illegal gambling in all of its forms.
Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate that.
Mr. Chair, I do have some follow-up, but I want to give way to my colleague because he hasn't asked any questions yet, unless you insist. I have about 5 follow-up questions, but I'll give way to the member from Red Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Member for Red Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Commissioner. Thank you for coming. It's good to have you here. Commissioner, would you tell the committee when you arrived in Cayman to take up your post as commissioner?
Yes, sir. November 2016, 1st November 2016.
So you've been here then 6 years.
Yes, sir.
Are you aware, sir, that over the course of a significant number of years, I won't tie you to a particular number because you weren't here then, there has developed a culture of acceptance of what is generally called the numbers game?
Yes, sir, I am aware, and I suppose one that caused me some angst. Yeah.
So the law, or the act as we now call it, that we are operating under was first passed in 1964. During the course of your evidence, you have repeatedly referred to illegal gambling. You agree with me, sir, that with the exception of the amendment to the gambling law in 2015 that legalized the holding of raffles by churches, service associations, and voluntary associations, all other forms of gambling in the Cayman Islands are illegal?
That's my understanding, sir, yeah.
And I can say to you, Commissioner, that well before that amendment in 2015, many service associations, voluntary associations, sold tickets, as they still do, for raffles, essentially a game of chance. You pay $10 for a ticket, or buy as many as you want, and there's a $5,000 prize at the end of the day. So that the amendment in 2015 was an acknowledgement by the government at the time. And I can say this with absolute certainty because I was premier at the time, that we needed to legalize or legitimize what had become over the years an accepted and quite proper manner of service organizations being able to raise money for their various purposes. Now, Commissioner, I think I can say with some certainty that the numbers game has been around in Cayman for now pushing 40 years. It wasn't something that I knew about when I was a boy, but certainly in early adulthood, numbers became something that people did. Now, I think, Mr. Chairman, through you to the Commissioner, that what has happened over the course of that period is analogous to what happened with respect to the holding of raffles by service organizations. It is seen as something that is acceptable indeed by many, as something that is good, something that provides an opportunity for ordinary people to get some winnings, and that the perception, that broadly speaking, is that it is quite harmless. Now, Commissioner, as I said, you keep referring, or you kept referring in your evidence to unlawful gambling. The reality is all forms of gambling except that carve out for service organizations and churches, all forms of gambling are currently illegal. Now, and this is not your doing, but I think it's important for the narrative. The government has obviously been asking itself whether or not that state of affairs, that is, that all forms of gambling, except the carve-out for churches and voluntary associations, should remain the case. For they have brought, and we have agreed, a motion for a referendum on the issue. Now, I take no issue with continuing to criminalize some obviously bad forms of gambling, cockfighting in particular, that sort of stuff. But Commissioner, do you not think that given how deeply entrenched the numbers game is in our culture, that it would be better to put in place systems which regulated that, rather than seeking to ramp up the penalties, which are bound to bite hardest on the most vulnerable, that is, the retiree who goes to buy a number in the hope, or a few numbers in the hope that they're going to win $200 or $300 or $500, rather than the people who sell the numbers, or those who are at the top of the organizations that you described, the criminal organizations you described. Because the fear that people like me and most of my colleagues on this side, and indeed some on the other side, have, is that the more likely consequence of increasing fines to up to $10,000 is that we are not likely to see many of the sellers before the courts, because they are far more savvy. What we are more likely to see, as has been the case in the distant past, are little old ladies and elderly gentlemen being charged with offenses of buying a number. That's not the technical or legal term, but that's how Caymanians express it. Buying a number. And I'm afraid that we're going to have to put in place, and the government will have to find the money for this, some secure retirement homes, because you can't put these people in jail, not up Northwood or Fairbanks, because they're going to need all kinds of other assistance.
And I remember it's a long question. And I asked the Commissioner to answer.
Well, Commissioner, Mr. Chairman says you don't have to answer that question. So, but I'll leave it hanging there. But Mr. Chairman, through you to the Commissioner, but that is our big concern. We need to find a way to avoid penalizing some of the most vulnerable in this community who are operating on various small fixed incomes, and I'm saying this because I talk to these people, I meet these people almost every day of my life. They ask me, I'll give you this anecdote, sir. So it is my birthday, the 6th of September. So I walk into a licensed establishment and someone says, "Happy birthday, Mr. Alden." I say, "Thank you very much." Next one says, "Mr. Alden, today is your birthday?" "Yes, today is my birthday. 6th of September. "What year were you born?" 61. "And I am 61 today." "I got to play that number. 61, turn it backwards, that's 16. And you know what? They won. But that I'm saying that this is such a part of the local culture now that it seems to me beyond wrong to seek to penalize further ordinary people like this who believe and in many instances can demonstrate that they are actually deriving a benefit from doing so. Surely what we should be trying to do, which I hope is where the government is trying to go with this referendum, is to put in place a system where we can regulate it, that we can avoid, as far as that is ever possible, the criminal element. I'm not going to ask you to comment on that, Commissioner, because that policy is not your remit in this context.
You're not interested in an answer from the Commissioner?
No, he may comment, but I'm saying I wasn't expecting him to comment on policy because that's not really his remit. But obviously, if the Commissioner wants to say something, I'm more than happy to hear.
Commissioner, you wish to comment? Remember, turn off your mic.
Not sure, Ron. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just in two parts, sir, and I picked up the piece about the raffle, and I completely understand that. The community raffle, where there's a set of rules around it and the changes that took place to facilitate that. But I do have a difficulty then reconciling the criminal association then with the illegal gambling. That's the bit that I struggle to reconcile, but I think because I've said it earlier on, because of the money that's made from the use it's put to. And then when we bring it back into the realm of drugs and guns and intimidation and extortion and all those things that are impacting safe community in the Cayman Islands. So I well appreciate the concept, both nationally here and internationally, on the concept of private members' raffles and raffles for particular reasons for schools and communities. I think there's a completely different proposition with illegal gambling and all the criminality that's associated with it, the money that's made, and yes, the unfortunate people that are used as mules in this criminal enterprise. I think I've said the rest, more or less, in terms of where I stand as the Commissioner of Police on illegal gambling. But if that assists in terms of my understanding, so separating the issue around the raffle for the community and the good of the community, and then all of this illegal activity associated with illegal gambling and that criminal activity and the money that's generated and the proceeds of crime and all that comes with that. Maybe that's...
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. I just wanted to finish up with this particular line, though. I presume all members of the committee will have to take your word for when you talk about the level of criminality that is associated with, you keep saying illegal gambling. My focus really is about the numbers. So, but I can't argue with you about that because I don't have your knowledge or access to your information in that regard. But I would want to know if you will agree with me that the robberies and so forth and other and other unlawful conduct that we've been suffering with, particularly recently, but this is not the first time that we've had that, is not limited to, the victims are not limited to those who are associated with the numbers game. And if you could provide some, if you do have it, some statistics about how many of the reported robberies over the course of the last, say, 6 months have had as their victims people in or around the sale and purchase of numbers or entities.
Thank you, sir. And because of the short notice, I don't have really detailed statistics, but I do have a number of crimes that are associated with illegal gambling that occurred from 2021 to 2022. I have some details of them here, and altogether we're looking at, apart from the murder, we're looking at 12 crimes that were associated with illegal gambling and aggravated burglary. One place hit twice, as involving illegal gambling, targeted twice because of the monies that were involved in it. So known locations that are known to us. I could provide some details, but I think it's just a general thrust of going back to the dates. An attempted robbery at Archie's Bar on 14/12/2021, a robbery at Welly's Cool Spot on the 23rd of the 12th, 2021, Georgetown. I have names of persons that were arrested. I have names of injured parties. I have numbers of monies that was stolen during it. I don't think it serves any, I could go through them if it was of any great detail, but I do have some preliminary details of the crimes that were involved in illegal gambling between 2021 and 2022. And in Cayman terms, in terms of the commission of crime that we have here, they are pretty significant. I mean, the numbers aren't huge, but they're pretty significant in terms of the number of crimes that we have here in the Cayman Islands, and they are of concern.
Commissioner, I understand that, and I would not for a moment suggest that number sellers aren't a target of people who wish to rob, and that indeed, I'm sure there are some of these incidents that go unreported because of the illegal nature. Not trying to argue against that at all.
Yeah.
But I would ask you if you'd agree with me that other entities, fast food restaurants, bars, gas stations are all subject to robberies. And the quick, I'll finish with this, and the quick calculation that we've done has demonstrated that of the 53 reported robberies in the last 4 or 5 months, 3 of them, only 3 of them, related to places where, or individuals involved in one way or another with the numbers game. The point being, sir, is that for those who believe the premise that simply increasing the penalties for selling or buying numbers is going to somehow magically reduce the number of robberies or other illegal activities, I think we're dreaming in color if that's what we are hoping for. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, member from Red Bay, Mr. Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I said in my wrap-up that I would have had a couple of more questions to follow up when my memory was working, so they have come to me. Can the Commissioner say, through you, Mr. Chair, what percentage does the commissioner believe of the whole population may be involved in purchasing of numbers? Because obviously it's very prevalent. Do you have any estimates?
I'm afraid not, sir. I don't. It'd be a pure guess. As I said, my information is it's right across the social strata. We're concerned with a range of persons. It's not confined. It's right across the social spectrum.
Okay, I accept that. Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. So we acknowledge it's just a high level of acceptance, and you heard other members ask about that. So as well as a nonchalant approach, probably not the best word, but there's an approach to being involved in it where people are involved in an illegal activity with no regard to the fact that it's illegal. So the people who may be selling it are what could be considered as their risk level from a criminal perspective is low. Would that be a fair assessment?
I'm not sure I'm understanding. Sorry, apologies. Yeah.
Okay, let me put it this way. So obviously a person under the law right now who's caught selling a number,
Yeah.
who usually based on intel is the target of a robber, their risk profile for criminality and being involved in selling is pretty low because the penalties are low. So if we change the penalties of a person who sells numbers from, or if you were caught selling numbers and you get caught and your penalty is $100 with no jail time, and you change that in law now to $3,000 and potentially 3 years in prison, do you think that the risk profile of the type of criminal, because we were assuming that the person who's selling the number now is considered to be a criminal, would that be correct?
Well, it's a criminal offence.
It's a criminal offence. Yeah. Okay, so the risk profile, the person whose appetite for being caught is based on a theory of some people do low-line criminality and some people do high-level criminality. Do you accept that?
You're providing a deterrent, and I suppose my understanding is the ultimate objective is to eradicate illegal gambling, to stop illegal gambling.
Agreed, but there is not everybody involved. There's not a high percentage of murders, which is a serious crime. But then you have a lot of petty stuff like traffic stuff. So
Sure.
you got different risk levels of people who are willingness to do criminality. Okay.
Yeah.
So what I'm getting at is the level of the risk profile of the person who's selling numbers now is low due to the fact of the type of penalty they would receive, which is a very low fine and no jail time.
You disincentivize them from engaging in that type of criminal activity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So now we're trying to increase the penalties to ensure that the people don't want to be involved. But we also have said that there's a high level of acceptance, therefore there's a high level of demand. I'm going to make a suggestion to you, and I want you to tell me whether or not you think my theory makes sense. We're going to change the law so the seller, who is the normal target by the robber, is going to increase their penalties to go to prison. The person who's selling now, they will have to examine themselves and say, do I want to continue to be in this kind of activity? Because I now no longer just going to get a $100 fine in a criminal record. I know potentially may have a $3,000 fine and go to jail. I'm saying that people may change from that position to say, I no longer want to be involved. But if the demand is still there by the high acceptance of this activity, it's going to be filled with somebody else whose willingness to, if they get caught, or acceptance that if they get caught, they're going to go to jail for 3 years. So you would agree with me that it's a higher risk profile criminal, meaning a person who is more willing to do severe things because the penalty is more severe. Would that be a fair assessment?
Again, I think I'm disincentivized to do this because the penalties are going against me. There's a higher penalty, there's a higher risk.
Yes.
That's my understanding of it. And then you speak about the level of acceptance. Is the level of acceptance among the people who engage in this type of activity, but not a level of acceptance by the wider community who don't accept this type of activity?
Yes, so acceptance and demand is what I'm trying to create here, because I'm suggesting to you that when we increase this, the demand is still going to be there for purchasing of numbers. And the people who sell the numbers may retract and say, I no longer want to take the chance to do this because I don't want to go to prison. And then somebody else is going to fill that void who will say, I am willing to go to jail if I get caught, who is a higher risk profile individual. And what we will then have is when the robber goes to that higher risk profile person who's selling the number, usually what we have, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, usually what we have is a person potentially with a gun going to a person who doesn't have a gun, who has loads of cash in them, and their willingness to just say, here you go, Mr. Gunman, I'm not going to do anything, and it's later on reported to police. What could potentially happen is the person who's selling is now a new higher risk profile criminal who says, you know what, I'm selling numbers, but I'm also going to have a gun myself. So when the robber comes, now you have a greater conflict of, rather than it be before a person who would give up the money, you have a gunman coming after a gunman. Is it plausible? Here's the question. Is it plausible we can make this matter worse with higher percentages of gunplay and severe assaults and incidences if we were to change the law, ultimately allowing the risk profile to be higher because the penalties are higher?
I gather from what you're saying is that we're increasing the risk.
Sorry, I think the AG was just assisting me rather than say risk profile, risk appetite in respect to the type of persons involved in the activity.
So what I'm interpreting from what you're saying, sir, is that if we change the law, then we're actually creating a bigger problem, which obviously I can't support. I mean, we have to address it. We're either addressing the rule of law or we're not addressing the rule of law, which is my respectful submission to you. And my sense would be that is when we provide this deterrence or this unacceptance or this intolerance, there'll be less people committing the crime because you're disincentivized. But I'm not going on the basis that there's going to be an escalation in violence because the law is changing.
Okay, I accept that through you, Mr. Chair, that maybe you may not be inclined to accept that because you're a law enforcement agent. Exactly. That's your principal training, that yes, deterrence through enforcement is a way. But past history has shown us that like for instance, what was the time called prohibition with alcohol showed where the severity of criminality around that illegal activity was also reduced when it became legal. Would you accept that?
But also the police step up their enforcement. At the end, it's not just between the two parties deciding who will escalate. The police will be escalating their enforcement actions.
So you're suggesting then, through you, Mr. Chair, that we legalize it and then you enforce your enforcement or increase your enforcement and then we solve the problem?
No, I don't think I said legalize. I don't think that was an issue I raised. My sense would be that my concern is we don't have the appropriate powers in place to deal with the outputs or the consequences of illegal gambling in the Cayman Islands. That has always been my position since I became to understand it.
Okay, so you wouldn't agree that there's a high potential chance that the risk appetite of the type of people that would be involved could create more severity? This is on the record. I just want to make sure that if I understand that, that's what you just said.
My sense, I don't see that as being the primary risk. The primary risk is not having the appropriate laws in place to deal with all of the associated consequences with illegal gambling.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Through you, Mr. Chair, last question. Do you recall when this was presented to the opposition by yourself as suggestions to bring this bill? Do you remember when that was?
I'm sorry, when I present to NSC?
To the government.
Started my papers in 2018, 2019. We've had discussions ongoing. 2018, 2019, interrupted in COVID, and we got back at it in 2021, 2022.
Thank you for the historical context. And I know that you presented it to the past government. We've heard evidence of that, and they accepted it, and then they retracted it in the past administration. I'm talking about this current one, the new government now. You came to us previously, I think it was about a year ago,
Okay.
and suggested that with the criminality, that the government should consider increasing the penalties.
Yes,
Is that
accept
correct?
that. I accept that, yes.
Who initiated for that to be brought to the government, for you to do the presentation to government?
I'll have to be reminded on that. It would have raised at National Security Council. I would have had it on the agenda through the National Security Council, and I would have been trying to press that through His Excellency the Governor, through the National Security Council for a considerable period. I would have raised it on a number of occasions.
So is it correct, this is something I don't know, that the National Security Council supported for it to be brought to government to bring to Parliament?
That's my understanding. I mean, I'm subject to correction on that through Cabinet Secretary, but that's my understanding. I had taken it to NSC, and the next stage then was to take it to caucus, to take it to Cabinet.
Thank you. Follow up, Mr. Chairman. Do you know what the membership of the National Security Council, and if there's any members of the opposition on that council?
I do, yes, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Thank you, Honourable
Sorry,
Minister.
I said thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioner.
Yeah.
And thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing me the line of questioning.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. Thank you, Commissioner. And did you have questions? No. Are there any other questions for the Commissioner? I mean, I noticed we don't necessarily have a quorum, but we would want to bring back the Commissioner unless it's absolutely necessary.
Mr. Chair, the Commissioner made himself available, having waived the 7 days notice, and if members thought it was prudent or essential to ask him questions, they would have occupied their chairs. So I would have no objection in thanking the Commissioner and bid him farewell so he can carry on his enforcement duties in this country. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner, thank you, Minister. Just for the purpose of the record and amplification, when you mentioned about robberies, just to put that in context, my understanding is that you're talking about robberies of the custodians of the proceeds of the robbery, of the gambling. So the custodians of the large stash or person who are in possession of the proceeds from that are the ones who are being robbed.
Thank you, Chairman. And I think just to explain that then, so I think the premises being used for the illegal gambling or the proceeds would be known to the persons involved in the crime, and those are the premises would have been targeted. So more so than the actual individual person itself, it's the proceeds and the premises.
Thank you. Just want to clarify for the record, so you're not saying that this person who are involved in illegal numbers or carrying out robberies. That's not the case. That's not the premise.
No, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Commissioner, thanks for coming. Thanks for making yourself available at very, very short notice. We certainly appreciate it, and I think the committee certainly benefited immensely from your evidence. So thank you again. Appreciate it. Thank you. Honourable members, it's now approximately 1:45. I take it we would suspend for lunch. And members on, we come back at 2:30. 2:30, thanks.